Hello everyone. Today we're going to look at a skill that is important at AS Biology and also at A2 Biology, and that's learning how to draw block diagrams. It's something that you might have to do in an exam, in the practical exam for example, and usually it's one of the assessed practicals that we would do during the year. It's something that you can do at home, something that's slightly practical that you can do at home, and it's something that is, as we say, is a skill that some of you might need to practice more than others. Now it's drawing, but you don't need to be an artist. So I can draw block diagrams and I'm definitely not an artist. The reason why I say that is because biology diagrams, if they're block diagrams, really they are line drawings and they're clear line drawings. So if we look at this, what we're trying to do is identify tissues. When we get a sample, and obviously if you were doing this in an exam, it would be a photograph. And you would look at it and you would think, well, what tissues are there? So recently you were looking at the ileum and you were looking at the leaf. You're looking at two organs, and when you studied those, you studied the different tissues that were there. So for example, in the leaf, you talked about the upper epidermis and the lower epidermis. You talked about the palisade and the spongy mesophyll layers. And then obviously we've got different layers in the ileum. So a block diagram, you're not drawing individual cells. Each block of your diagram represents a tissue. Now the key things when you're drawing any kind of biology diagram, it has to represent what you're looking at. So in this case, the sample, or you're going to be basing it on photographs, it has to be the same shape. Okay, so it's not a textbook diagram that you've learnt off by heart. You need to be able to look at the shape of the cells or the structure that you're looking at and get those down on paper. As we said, you're going to pick out the layers, and so your diagram has to be drawn in proportion. This bit here sounds a bit strange. Sometimes when photographs are taken, if it's a cross section through something, it depends what angle or exactly where the razor blade goes through. And in some cases you might be missing things that you would normally find in that organ, simply because the section missed it out. There wasn't one of those structures at that part, whatever angle the section was taken at. So if something that you would normally expect to be in a diagram isn't in the photograph, leave it out. You just draw what you see. In terms of your actual drawings, we're talking about clear lines, not sketchy, and obviously labelling the layers. So what do I mean about clear line? First thing you do, look at the photograph or the actual sample, identify your tissues. Draw the outline, make sure that it represents the photograph. So it's a good idea, to work out if you've got something, that's that shape there. Okay, well at the top there, it's about a quarter of the way there. So if on your thing, put a wee mark there, and maybe it starts off in the bottom corner, so then you're going to try and copy the shape that you see there. So it has to be drawn in proportion, so your tissue layers must be relative to what you see. Don't just draw a textbook diagram. Not everything will be in your photograph, so if anything's missing, don't add it in. Clear lines, not sketches, and good labels. And it should be possible to get full marks in this kind of diagram. But the key thing is you have to have learnt textbook diagrams before you can make sense of the photograph or the real sample sitting in front of you. Okay, bye. Now, this is a very poor photograph of a pencil, cross section through a pencil. We're not going to worry about this wee bit here. We're just sort of looking at the cross section bit. So if you were an artist, you might draw something like that. Except you'd probably be better than that, and you might put a wee bit of shade and so on, and you might sort of put you can sort of see this marking in the wood. In a biology exam, that's going to get you nothing. In a biology diagram, they're looking for clear lines. So we want the shape of it. Now it's quite hard for me to draw on this iPad. Whoops, that's not too good, so I'm going to have to get the rubber out here. See if I can fix this bit here. Okay, and it's a wee bit messy there. Now, so that's a better diagram. Maybe not perfect shape, but that's what I mean by clear lines. Now, if I was drawing this on pencil, on paper, hopefully it would be clear. It wouldn't be just as wobbly as that. But that's what we're aiming for. In a block diagram, you're not shading, you're not drawing any kind of effect like that, and you're not drawing individual cells, you're just drawing tissue layers. So, in the exam, and this came up a few years ago, this example, in your exam paper there was a photograph and it said, this photograph shows a transverse section, transverse means cross section, through part of a privet leaf, and then it gives you the Latin name for that. Now, it doesn't matter what kind of leaf, whether it's privet leaf, a sycamore leaf, doesn't matter. You know the general structure of a leaf. You're asked to draw a block diagram of the leaf section in the box below, label at least 3 of the main tissues visible. The photograph you got, and this is the photograph. So normally so the skill is being able to interpret the photograph, work out where those different looked at cross section through a leaf of that photograph, you need to have learned. Well, this at the top here looks to be the upper epidermis. And down here, whoops, it's a bit messy. Down here we've got the lower epidermis. So I'm just going to go over on the photograph now. Obviously, when you're drawing, you're not drawing on a photograph. But the reason I'm doing this is so that you can see the tissues clearly. So you have to draw that. So they normally give you a square or whatever shape the photograph is so that you know roughly. So we want to end up roughly here at the top and down to about here. So basically I'm going to try and draw a nice smooth line. And trying to keep, so it's quite hard to draw on the iPad. And down here, whoops, that's a wee bit messy. Again, not brilliant. So we've got, and you would get a ruler and you would label this. Now there would normally be a lot of space here, so I'm going to do it over here. And this would be the upper epidermis. And lower epidermis. Now, and I say you get a pencil and a ruler. Let's go back to the photograph then. Now there is some kind of structure here over on the left. Now, later on we'll learn more about phloem and xylem vessels. For now we're going to look, let's see if we can spot our palisade cells. So our palisade cells were the ones that were long and thin and they were in the top half. And so it looks like this is roughly our palisade mesophyll layer. And then this is our spongy mesophyll. So the palisade mesophyll, spongy mesophyll. So we're going to draw this bit here. Well, that would have been better if it had been black. Okay. So the upper layer is the palisade mesophyll. And underneath we've got the spongy mesophyll. Now, if we look at the photograph, we've got this bit over here. I've just gone over it in blue. This is vascular tissue. Now, when you studied the structure of the leaf, you learned that there were two types of vascular tissue, phloem and xylem. The xylem are the hollow cells. So if we look, the xylem are the ones at the bigger ones at the top, and then we've got phloem vessels there underneath. So you can label, xylem at the top, phloem underneath, or what I'm just going to do here is just label that as vascular tissue. So vascular tissue, or as I said, the big cells are the xylem, and the smaller ones are the phloem. Now, let's have a look. I should have drawn with clear lines. Now, I've been a little bit messy here. Simply, as I said, it's a wee bit messy there. If that was me, I'd be getting a rubber out, doing it again. That's a wee bit messy. That's not perfect, but it's very hard to draw on this device here. It says, draw a block diagram, label at least 3 of the main tissues visible. So what have I got? I've got upper epidermis and lower epidermis. Now in the mark scheme, they're not going to give you 2 separate marks for that. So just be careful about that. Always make sure you've got at least 1 more than they're asking for. So we've got the the upper and the lower epidermis. We've got the palisade mesophyll. We've got the spongy mesophyll. And I've got xylem and phloem, or you could just label the whole thing as vascular tissue there. So that's our labels. When they're marking your actual drawing, they're making sure that it's accurate. So it's the right shape, so that it looks the right shape, okay? And the tissue layers are the right size. So maybe if I was marking this, I wouldn't be too happy with this bit down here. It should have been a little bit wider. No broken lines, no cells drawn. You will lose a mark if you draw individual cells or if you break your line. So I need to go back here and just fix this bit up here. That line should continue. Okay. So the examiner is looking for, you've drawn the whole section. There's good relationship. The tissue layers are in proportion. The quality of diagram is good. In other words, it's clear, unbroken lines, and you haven't drawn any individual cells. And then another 3 marks for the labels. You need at least 3 labels there. There's R. First time, sometimes sixth form do these kind of things. They say it's cross-section of a leaf. I have to draw what I see in the photograph, so cross-section of a leaf. And I have actually got people draw me diagrams like this. And they've written upper epidermis up here, lower epidermis down here. In other words, they've drawn a diagram of. Let's move on. Textbook. That's the diagram that's in your textbook. Now, that doesn't look anything like the photograph. It's a different shape. But yet, we can look at this and we can try and work out. Let's see if I get a thicker pen. Where are the tissue layers here? Well, we've got, that's the upper epidermis. And down here, we've got the lower epidermis. This layer here, palisade mesophyll, and down here, spongy mesophyll. So if you were drawing a diagram, what I would also put, I would put in, now I've gone over it there, but we've got a waxy cuticle. We've got a very thin layer of waxy cuticle. Now it's not a tissue layer because it's not, there's no cells there, but it is a layer that's found in the leaf. So a diagram, you're not drawing individual cells, you're just showing where these layers are, and then you would label them. Now, if we get rid of my markings there and go back there, for you to be able to make this diagram, so you need to know that you're looking for the upper epidermis and the lower epidermis. You're looking for the palisade mesophyll, and the cells are columnar, longer and thin. And then we've got this bit here, spongy mesophyll, where we've got all these big air spaces. So if we go back to the photo, whoops, and well, if we compare it to that, it's got some of the same labels. It's got the upper epidermis, palisade mesophyll, spongy mesophyll, lower epidermis. There's no individual cells. That shape is completely different from, it doesn't look anything like what they're looking at. So that person will be getting no marks. Okay, hopefully you recognise this as a cross section or transverse section that's been taken through the ilium. Now, this is from a few years back, and the people didn't have to draw a block diagram of this, but I'm going to use it just to make a few points here. So, if you were asked to draw a block diagram of this, you're labelling the tissue layers. Now they've actually labelled one for you, the muscularis mucosa, to make a block diagram out of this. So, what are these labels here? Well, let's add some labels first before we do anything more. We've got the lumen of the gut there. We've got the muscularis mucosa. The muscularis mucosa is not pointing to the yellowy layer, it's pointing to a very thin layer which looks to be purple. If I make it a little bit bigger, it's just that very thin layer there. Okay. So if we look over in the left hand side, we've got A and B labelled. So hopefully so that means that A is the mucosa. Then we've got the muscularis mucosa, and then hopefully you've also remembered that you've got the submucosa underneath. C, so if we get that information here, we've got the muscularis externa, and finally the serosa. Now, so if you were drawing a block diagram, I'm going to use a different colour here. Whoops, this should be right up against this. I'm not doing too well. Now the mucosa is all of the rest of it. So that's it. Now if I just sketch around this. Now, so if we were to remove photograph, let's see if I can manage to do that. Okay, so let's see if I can get rid of the photograph. Now, that's pretty messy, but you get the idea. Say if it was that's messy there, that's messy there, you'd have to tidy that up, and obviously tidy it up there. But if we add in our labels, we've got the muscula externa, serosa. We said this was the mucosa. This is already labelled as the muscularis mucosa. And then this layer here is the submucosa. Okay? So that would be a block diagram through the ileum. Now, hopefully your diagrams will be a lot neater than mine. As I said, it's really hard to get a good clear line on the iPad. You can't put your hand down, you can't lean on it. But that doesn't look anything like... But to be able to draw a diagram, you need to have learnt this. And importantly, you need to remember the order that these layers come in. In other words, that you start off... Let me see. You start off with the mucosa. Underneath it, you've got the muscularis mucosa, then the submucosa, muscularis externa, and finally on the outside, the serosa. You need to learn that to be remembered. Closest to the lumen, we've got the mucosa. So we've talked about that and that. Then we've got quite a thick layer of muscle, muscularis externa, and then the outer layer, the tough outer layer, is called the serosa. Diagram you've got in your textbook, nothing like it whatsoever, but yet you need to know those tissue layers in the right order. You can't draw a block diagram if you haven't learnt the theory first. So, just to recap,